Welcome back to the channel. True Word Faith for Life with Dr. Sean channel. I really appreciate you joining us. Hey, just so you know, I'm going to be doing a review on this Bible. Keyword, Hebrew Greek Keyword Study Bible. I got a bunch of them. I've given, I don't know how many away. It's an incredible Bible, and I'm going to be reviewing it. And I'm super excited about that. On Friday. I think this Friday. Let's see here. Yeah, Friday. No, I think that's the 20th. Sunday, I'm doing What About Time? 1,000 Years Reign. It's going to be a 2-part series. And let's see. Friday. I wonder what's this Friday. I don't know. Better figure it out. You've reached the True Word Faith for Life channel, and I am glad to have you. I'm going to let it spool here a little bit for folks. I'm very happy to have all of you all joining. I've missed being with you this Sunday and Friday. I hope all of you had a happy Thanksgiving. I did. I got to be with my family, all with the exception of my son, who we desperately missed. We got to see my grandson, and that was awesome. Super, super good. Yeah, I loved it. Anyway, if you could let me know if this is loud enough, I appreciate it. I'm going to get started here. This is a 3-part series. It's parts 1 through 3. Prophets, Priests, and Kings. The birth of a prophet and the fall of a judge. Oof. Oof. Sad but true. But a lot of it is our life. You know, we look at their lives and we say, oh, well, they were highfalutin folks. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how much the original biblical characters that we look back on, and we think somehow or another their life was super easy. It was super hard. But then we find a lot of areas that they fell, a lot of areas that they struggled. We struggle. So it's understandable. So welcome back to the channel. Welcome to this first episode of the 3-part series. This is drawn from my newly published book, True Word Faith for Life. Now I say newly published because I have the proof copies coming from the second time through. I had a little trouble with it, and so we're fixing it up. We fixed it up, thanks to Marcel and Martin. Pray for Martin. Pray for Martin, for peace and for physical comfort and spiritual comfort and physical comfort. Yeah. Pray for that today. And for Marcel. You know, they worked hard on this. I really appreciate it. And I also drew from the Bible, by the way. I always draw from the Bible. So today we're exploring the opening chapters of 1 Samuel, where we see a significant shift in Israel's leadership, beginning with the deeply emotional story of Hannah and the birth of the prophet Samuel. All right, let's have it. I've talked enough about that. Let's talk about this. So let's start by setting the scene. Israel is in a time of complete instability. The judges are leading the people, but the moral and spiritual decline is evident. God's about to raise up a prophet who's going to guide Israel through one of its most important transitions. So then we got to go back to Hannah. Hannah, the name that is a palindrome, same forward as it is back, H-A-N-N-A-H. Hannah's faith in God's provision. Wow, what a story. It's one of immense sorrow, but it's a story about intense and deep faith. She was barren. What a harsh word, right? Barren. She was unable to have children. And you know, I thought about, when I was writing this, you know, I know some of the listeners in the audience are unable to have children. Either you're the wife or you're the husband, and you know, your family you can't have children, some physical malady or who knows. So I'm not insensitive to that this story may resonate pretty powerfully with you. It's a little bit different in this time because in this time, in Hannah's time, in this time of biblical history, when we look back on it, if you were barren, that caused great shame. It was a great shame and great heartache. It was a real embarrassment back then. So the birth of a prophet and the fall of a judge. So Hannah's faith in God's provision, they just scream here. They just scream out. It's unreal. So Hannah's name in Hebrew is Hannah, which means grace or favor. And really her name alone underscores God's eventual outpouring of grace upon her life. Now, the word used in 1 Samuel 1:10 to describe her emotional state, marat nefesh, literally means bitterness of the soul. Marat nefesh, bitterness of the soul. So this phrase, captures the raw, visceral, gut-wrenching pain that she felt, a level of sorrow that resonates universally. I think we can all, at different times in our lives, we've all been in that place. I have. I can say that I have. But she was, because the cultural implications, all of the implications, she was in this really, really terrible, terrible pain. And culturally, barrenness wasn't only a personal tragedy, but it was a social stigma in ancient Israel. It often led to feelings of failure and exclusion, especially in a society where lineage and inheritance were paramount. That was a huge thing. Yet, because remember, they're thinking about all the time, how do we keep this life thing going? How do we keep this lineage thing going? So when a daughter can't, or when a wife can't provide that to the family, that had come before her, that almost feels like extinction, like we're headed towards extinction. But the part that's amazing here is Hannah's response. She poured out her heart to Adonai. She reflects, I don't know, I'd say unshakable. And it's unshakable faith rooted in the understanding as God, look, I understand that God is my ultimate provider. And Hannah got that, I don't want to say down pat, but she really knew. She knew God is my ultimate provider. Hannah's silent prayer is significant, though. Unlike the loud public prayers that were common in ancient Near East, big, lofty, everyone's got to hear me. Her prayer is deeply personal. And it highlighted that God values sincerity of the heart over external rituals. This models how we too can approach God intimately. In 1 Samuel 1:10, we read, "In deep depression, she prayed to Adonai and cried, the word of the Lord, thanks be to God." Can you feel her pain? In deep depression, she prayed to Adonai and cried. Through her prayer, she cried through her prayer. I don't know if you've ever felt that. Have you ever cried out to God like that? In deep, deep, deep depression, and you prayed out to Adonai and you cried out to God. Maybe think about that. Maybe in comments on playback. Maybe you, if you're up to it, share an example of a time when that happened and what came of it. So imagine in today's world, a woman who has tried everything, who's faced societal pressures and judgment. She's standing before God utterly broken. But what does she do instead of wallowing in despair and blaming God? Hannah. She brings her pain directly to God in prayer. And she makes a vow. She makes a vow to God. Don't take lightly the vow. Don't make a covenant or a vow that you're not going to keep. God, if you do this, I'll do that. And then you don't. He delivers and you don't. Hannah says, she makes this vow to God. If God grants her a son, she will dedicate him to the Lord for his entire life. Now remember, they don't know what their future is here. Everything's kind of wild back in this time. Israel's just trying to figure itself out. The Hebrew people are figuring it out. There's a lot of struggle. There are a lot of influences all around. Pagan influences. Goyim, those who are not believers, those who are not Jews. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's pause just a second here. In today's culture, we often try to fix things ourselves. I know I do. I'll raise my hand. I know I do. Maybe you do. You ever, if you're a dude and you're listening to this and you're married, or you have a girlfriend, and she says, listen, I'm going to tell you about this problem, but I don't want you to give me a solution. I just want you to listen. You ever hear that? Well, we want to fix it. We're saying, well, I want to fix it. I don't want to listen to it and not do anything. I want to listen to it and go, okay, here's the problem. Let me deal with it. We want to fix everything ourselves. Well, in society, in this culture that we live in, yeah, we got to fix it. I got to fix it myself. So when we feel hopeless, we turn to distractions. I'll give you a great example. Social media. Social media is a massive, massive distraction. It comes right to this thing. Comes right to that. Comes right to our phone. Some of you have big phones and some of you have little phones, but your social media is right there. Listen, I'm not going to bash on it because it keeps me close. I get to have updates on family and friends that live far away, or I live far from them. I get to follow situations, good and sorrowful situations. It links me to people I would never be linked to, most likely ever. So I don't bash on social media, but when we're using it as a distraction, we're feeling hopeless, we're feeling desperate, we're lonely. We want to find some sort of distraction to get us off that mindset, that hopelessness mindset. So we go to social media. This is not as popular anymore, but self-help books. Now, I will tell you, I'm a self-help book guy. I like to improve myself. Whenever I was in my car, I used to drive a ton or fly. When I was in my car by myself, I would buy. Back then, we had cassette tapes. Now, it's crazy, so easy. Just download it. There it is. And people by the name of Jim Rohn. He was really my favorite. He is my favorite. Tony Robbins. I got to go to a big thing with him, big things, and then I got to go to a personal thing with only 13 people, and it was amazing. Massively helped me overcome a lot of things. Oh, Dr. Sean, self-help, that's wrong, that's not of God. Well, come on, God gives us, those people are great men of faith. You may not think, Jim Rohn was an amazing man of faith. Almost everything they did was based on Scripture. Zig Ziglar, God rest his soul, an amazing man. Jim Rohn has passed on to his reward as well. So they've been a great help for me. Good morning, Samantha. Good morning. So all of them have been great. Now you don't choose every single one, but I used to read a lot of self-help books. Even okay, how do I manage this situation? I loved to learn, and I always want to improve. If you're studying, well, I'll give you an example. On the 20th, I think it's the 20th that I'm doing this, the Hebrew Greek Keyword Study Bible. When I do that review, that's a self-help book. I said, well, I thought you were talking about something. No, it's a self-help book. That's a great self-help book. But what happens, and this can be either self-imposed, or it can be just because of your situation. I have a dear friend who's very ill, by himself, essentially, and lonely isolation. So it can either happen because you say, hey, I'm going off to myself. I'm not going to be around people. So you isolate. You self-isolate. But Hannah shows us the power of turning to God with everything. She laid her desires, her brokenness, her life at his feet. And God answered. When life breaks you down, where do you turn? Hannah's story teaches us that we can choose to either drown in our own despair or we can bring it to God. I'm guilty. Sometimes I don't do that. God, I got this. I've gone to you too many times. I've gone to you too many times with things. Yeah, maybe you can identify. Maybe you can identify. It's something I struggle with. I've got to handle this myself. Plus, I've brought it to God all these times. I still have the problem. He's busy. Hannah's story teaches us that we can choose to either drown in our despair or bring it to God. Her deep, raw prayer reminds us that God is near to the brokenhearted. Maybe just like Hannah, your breakthroughs, maybe they're waiting right around the other side of that prayer that you've been holding back on praying. Well, then, here we go. Samuel's calling and Eli's failure. Oof, brutal. The failure of Eli and his sons, Hophni and Pinchas, illustrates the breakdown of both, and I'll explain to you how they link here. The spiritual and moral leadership. The text describes them as Bnei Belial, worthless men, sons of wickedness. This Hebrew term, it highlights utter disregard for Adonai's holiness and their role as Kohanim, which are priests. Yeah, they were priests. Brutal. I'll explain it. So their abuse of the sacrificial system, remember, we're under a very different system now, but they were under the sacrificial system, and not only desecrated the offerings, which was horrific, but it disillusioned the people, created a crisis of faith. Eli's leniency toward his sons, it contrasted starkly with Hannah's dedication of Samuel. Right? Samuel is the son. Samuel's the son. But Eli, he has this leniency towards his sons. He knew what was right. But he was lenient. We say, I don't want to be yelling at my child all the time. I don't want to be yelling at my child all the time. Now, you don't have to be yelling at him all the time. Good morning, Martin. We're praying for you. I just ask that the audience keep you in their prayers. So Samuel, he grows up in this holiness. He was surrounded by corruption, but he grew up in holiness. When Samuel hears God's call, he responds with, I'm going to say this is a kind of a sentence. Deberki shomia avdeka. Deberki shomia avdeka. Meaning, speak, for your servant is listening. That's 1 Samuel 3:10. 1 Samuel 3:10. He was humble. He was ready. He was humble and he was ready to act. But in Eli's household, this wasn't present. This was not a quality that was present. Deberaki shomeh avdecha. Speak, for your servant is listening. Listening, or shomia, is in Hebrew. It's not just listening, but it's obeying. And Samuel's readiness to hear and obey Adonai contrasts with Eli and his sons. And this, I hate to say it, but it points to the importance of an obedient heart. We don't like obedience. Oh man, that's just too hard. So let's move forward. So Hannah's faith is rewarded. She gives birth to Samuel, and true to her word, she dedicates him to God. Samuel grows up under the care of Eli. He's the high priest. Eli is the high priest. Hannah, Eli, high priest. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Eli, even though he was a servant of God, he is blind to the corruption in his own household. His sons Hophni and Phinehas are described in 1 Samuel 2, 12 through 17. I'll read it. Eli's sons were scoundrels who had no regard for Adonai. The rule these Kohanim followed in dealing with the people was that when anyone offered a sacrifice, the Kohen servant would come while the meat was stewing with a 3-pronged fork in his hand. He would stick it in the pan, kettle, cauldron, or pot, and the Kohen would take for himself whatever the fork brought up. This is how they dealt with all Israel who came there to Shiloh. The Kohen's servant would actually come before the fat had burned to smoke and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give the Kohen meat he can roast, because he doesn't want your meat stewed but raw." If the man answered, "First let the fat burn to smoke, then take as much as you want," he would say, "No, give it to me now, I'll take it by force." The sin of these young men was very serious in Adonai's view, because they treated offerings made to Adonai with contempt, the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So what's the big deal here, right? What's the big deal here? I just read a passage. It's strange, right? We're reading it. What the heck does that mean? I don't know what that means. So we skip over because I don't know what that means. But culturally, it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. So it's an immense deal, and here's why. There are broader cultural and theological implications. Now, this is a priestly leader. Eli's sons were Kohanim. They were priests. Right? Both his boys. I say this to parents. Maybe you have several children and one of them or more of them are just wayward. They're just wayward. They didn't do anything that you taught them. You taught them, that the old saying, "I taught you better than that. I taught you how to act better than that." And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't, and it's hurtful to us, right? We say, "Man, I hate this. I love my child, but they're behaving horribly." Well, Eli's sons, they were priests. They were priests. They were chosen to mediate in this context. They were chosen to mediate between God and the people. The corruption tarnished the priesthood. Their corruption tarnished the very thing that Eli, he represented. And this was so critically important. This corruption, it tarnished everything Eli stood for and the people relied upon. It alienated people from their proper worship. The Hebrew culture, it valued then and it values now the priestly role as sacred. So when they abused their power, it was especially grievous. Now, there's greed and exploitation here. Their greed violated the communal and spiritual nature of sacrificial worship. Sacrifices were acts of gratitude and obedience, but Eli's sons, they exploited them for their own personal gain. "Give me the best. I want the best of it." No, you take what I don't want. They reflect. It's a rejection. I've said this word here before. A rejection of chesed, which is covenantal loving kindness. Right? We love within this covenant. We love one another. We're kind to each other. We're generous to one another. They rejected that, and this was to characterize the relationship among God's people. So, this account, it foreshadows the rise of Samuel as a righteous leader, in contrast to the wickedness of Eli's house. Their sins led to God's judgment. Fulfilled his promise to raise up a faithful priest, a faithful priesthood. 1 Samuel 2:35. Ultimately, this points to the Messiah, the perfect high priest. Now, this passage, it serves as a cautionary tale about the danger of abusing God-given authority. Look, I'm not the pastor of a church. I'm just a guy with a microphone and software and YouTube channel. You don't have to listen to me. I'm not your priest. I'm not your pastor. There are several who have sent me messages and said, "Hey, that's how I view you because I don't have a church near me." There's a couple of guys who live in the wilderness, and they listen and they said, "Look, you're the only church. I have a Starlink. And that's how I listen to you. If it weren't for this, I wouldn't be able to, because there's no church within. I'm way out in the wilderness, and I appreciate that." And they say, "You, as far as we're concerned, you are our pastor." I take that very seriously. But in the Hebraic worldview, roles of leadership, especially the priesthood, man, you were held to a super high standard of integrity, obedience, and if you violated these roles, it's not just a sin against people. It's a direct affront to Adonai and his covenant. Eli's sons, they represent how spiritual leaders can either draw people closer to God or lead them into disillusionment and despair. And I tell people all the time, I say, "Hey, they say, "What's your goal for this channel?" I say, "I want to draw people closer to God. I want them to have a better relationship, a deeper relationship with the Lord. I want them to have a better and deeper understanding of Scripture and Hebraic worldview, culture, and language. I want them to understand the Greek implications and the Greek words. That's what I want to happen here." This paints a picture of profound spiritual corruption. By the way, I remember now, I'm going to do this 3 in a row. I'm pretty sure I'm going to do this 3 in a row. So on Friday's message at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll see part 2. And then on Sundays with Dr. Sean on the same channel, at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll see part 3. So this was profound spiritual corruption. Don't think that can't happen. There's churches, I see it all the time. Now, let me say this. I had a woman who sent me all these terrible emails, just, making ridiculous allegations that have been debunked fully and completely. And she professes to be a follower of Christ. And she professes to love God and love his people. But she spewed all of these terrible, terrible things about Billy Graham and others. I mean, she likes to throw it around. And in some cases, those things are true. The priesthood or the pastors, sometimes the people that we set up in front of us and put on a pedestal, sometimes they let us down. There are churches all over the country right now with massive ministries. Massive. They have millions of followers on social media. They have, their ministry is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year that they generate. It's big business. They have thousands of employees. And so when one of them falls, it's a big deal because their reach is so huge. Obviously, I'm not that guy. I have to say that Eli's sons, maybe they're not that different than some people today. Maybe these pulpit pimps, these prosperity preachers. Maybe this is, you could draw a line from Eli's sons to these pulpit pimps. Manipulating people for money. I don't know. Eli's sons, they were meant to be priests leading people to worship, but instead they abused their position for personal gain. It's not just a failure of leadership. It's a failure of the heart. Where was their heart? We see that with leaders throughout churches, not just in America, but all over the world. It's a failure of the heart. Eli, despite knowing what his sons were doing, he chose to look the other way. And sometimes as parents, we say, well, they're grown. What can I do? And you're right. You're right. But Eli had the responsibility to speak up, to acknowledge it. But then God calls Samuel in the middle of the night. Samuel hears God's voice for the first time. Now, he's young. He's just a boy. So he doesn't recognize it at first. Look, if God has talked to you audibly, I don't go into that with some cavalier attitude, right? Maybe you don't recognize it right away. But Eli recognizes that it's God calling him. And in 1 Samuel 3:10, this records Samuel's response. Adonai came and stood, then spoke as at the other times. Shmuel, Shmuel. Then Shmuel said, Samuel, speak, your servant is listening. Remember that word, or that line that I told you. And this is what he says. This is where he says it. Speak, your servant is listening. And remember, listening isn't just, oh, I hear you. It's obey. I'm listening and I'm obeying. I'm jumping. When you say jump, I ask how high on the way up. A key lesson here is Eli's failure is a warning to us all, especially leaders. Whether in the church family, whether in your family, or whether in your workplace. If you ignore sin, hurts, habits, and hang-ups, especially in your own life, you're going to have consequences. Samuel, on the other hand, he's an example of somebody who listens to God's voice, listens and obeys even from a young age. And in our modern world, distractions are everywhere. But are we tuned in to hear God's voice, or are we so overwhelmed by the noise of this world that we miss his call? Now, it doesn't stop here. Samuel's role in transitioning Israel, he is Navi. Samuel's role became Navi and Shaphat. Navi, Shaphat, which is prophet and judge. It marks the end of the period of the judges and begins, we'll call it a monarchy. His dual roles bridge the tribal leadership. It's a tribal leadership model that the Hebrews had. This is what they had all along. But now there's a change. Now all of a sudden there's like this centralized system under a king. When the Israelites demand a king to be like all the nations, I'll tell you what it is in Hebrew. 1 Samuel 8:5. They reject their unique identity as a people set apart, a sanctified people. They say, no, we want to be like the others. There's a Hebrew phrase, Checho Hagoyim, Goyim. Checho Hagoyim. It means like the other nations. So they wanted to be like the other nations. When we say the other nations, not the other Hebrew nations, the other Goyim, which are the Gentiles, the savages, the lost. Why do you want to be like them? Listen, this serves as a warning for us today. Just as Israel sought a human king for security, we have to resist the temptation to look to worldly solutions when God calls us to trust in him as our ultimate king. We have to. We have to listen. We have to obey God. We can't have bitterness in our soul. We have to accept grace. Listen, folks. The people's rejection of God, that's what this was. When they said, look, we want a king like the other nations. What they were doing is they were saying, God, you're not good enough for us. You're not what we want anymore. We want this other king like these other nations have. They rejected God as king. They wanted modern, popular, what's common. So they placed their faith in institutions or human leaders rather than God. As Samuel grows, he becomes this bridge between the era of the judges and the monarchy. But even Samuel, with all of his leadership and integrity, he faces a challenge when the people demand a king. 1 Samuel 8:5, the people they said to him, look, you are old and your sons don't follow your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations, all those others. We want to be like them. They wanted to be like the nations around them. They were tired of living by faith, and they were tired of trusting in a God they couldn't see. And they wanted something tangible, something touchable, a king, the symbol of strength and security. They would look at that. But Samuel warns them of the dangers of a human king in 1 Samuel 8:7. God responds, Adonai said to Shemuel, listen to the people, to everything they say to you, for it is not you they are rejecting me. They don't want me to be king over them. How often do we demand? In our modern lives, how often do we demand to be just like everybody else? We look at what others have. We're coming up on Christmas, right? Coming up on Christmas, we look at what others have, their successes, their relationships, their possessions, and we think, I want that. But in doing that, we risk rejecting God's unique plan for us, for you. Sometimes God gives us what we ask for, not because it's His best, but because we insist on it. The Israelites got their king, but at what cost? At what cost? The Israelites got their king. This is where we've gone from Hannah's deep, deep prayer, this intense prayer. And now, here they are. They've said, we want a king. All the way from a woman who said, God, I will dedicate my son, Shmuel or Samuel, his whole life. And now here we are. Now they're asking for a king. It's amazing how things can change, isn't it? If you like this video, please click the thumbs up. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to all the notifications. I don't know if you're a subscriber or if you're not, but I'd love it if you would click on subscribe, click on like, click on the bell, all notifications. I'm excited to deliver on Friday, part 2 of 3, Saul, the rise and fall of Israel's first king. You see, we're going to do it. Boom, boom, boom. Right in order. I'm excited to do it. Can't wait. I really appreciate you joining me today. You know, if you think about it, maybe share this with somebody who's wanting a deeper biblical knowledge. They want to understand how things happen. They want to have a better foundational view of Scripture. Maybe this will help them. Hey, I appreciate you listening today. Pray for those who you say you're going to pray for, by the way. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to pray for you. Oh, I'll pray for you. You say you're going to pray, pray. Amen. God bless you. Shalom Aleichem.